No one came back for her. The base stood empty under a sky that promised nothing. Warning lights blinked red against concrete walls scorched black from mortar fire 3 weeks prior. Wind screamed through gaps in the chain-link fencing, carrying dust that tasted like cordite and abandonment. They said she was just support personnel. They said she wouldn't last an hour if contact came. But when the enemy surged forward, 92 shadows moving through darkness, she was still there. White hair visible beneath the moonlight, rifle cold in her hands. 8 hours later, the base still stood, and everyone had to learn something they should have known from the beginning. They left the wrong person behind. Forward Operating Base Sentinel occupied a plateau overlooking Route Whiskey in the eastern province of Afghanistan. The Hindu Kush Mountains rose in the distance like broken teeth against the twilight sky. The year was 2009. The surge was in full effect. Every soldier in theater understood that this was the moment when the war would be won or lost. Staff Sergeant Nora Ashford stood in the center of the compound and listened to the silence. It was not peaceful. Silence on a military installation was never peaceful. It meant something had gone wrong, or was about to. The convoy had pulled out 47 minutes ago. She had watched the last Humvee disappear into the valley haze, its tail lights swallowed by distance and dust. Captain Garrett Hollis had looked back once through his window, caught her eye, then looked away. That single glance told her everything she needed to know. Nora was 34 years old. She had served for 12 years, 8 of those as a designated marksman. Her MOS was 11B with additional qualification as a squad-designated marksman. She could put a round through a dinner plate at 800 meters, could read wind and distance the way other people read newspapers. Her hair had gone completely white at 29. Premature graying, the medical officer had written in her file, probably stress-related. She had stopped dying it years ago. Let them see it. Let them remember the woman with white hair who never missed. The operations center was a converted shipping container, reinforced with sandbags and steel plating. Inside, 3 computer terminals glowed softly. They displayed tactical maps that no longer mattered. The radio set crackled with static. Not dead, just disconnected from anyone who cared to listen. Nora walked the perimeter slowly. Her boots echoed on cracked concrete. FOB Sentinel had been designed as a strategic position. 3 months ago, it was home to 47 personnel. Then the offensive shifted east. Resources got reallocated. The base became a waypoint, then a checkpoint, then a name on a list of installations scheduled for closure. She had been assigned here 6 weeks ago. Overwatch duty, they called it. Babysitting an empty road while the real war happened somewhere else. The guard towers stood at each corner of the compound. North, south, east, west. Each offered commanding views of the approaches. Good firing positions, reinforced walls, excellent fields of fire. Not that any of it mattered when you were the only person holding them. The armory was locked, but she had the codes. Inside, she found what remained after the evacuation. 3 cases of 7.62mm ammunition. 200 rounds of 50 caliber for the heavy machine gun mounted on Tower North. 6 fragmentation grenades that should have been logged out months ago. And her own rifle. An M110 semi-automatic sniper system that she had zeroed herself and trusted more than most people she had met. They had taken everything else. The crew-served weapons, the night vision equipment, the medical supplies beyond basic first aid. They had stripped the base down to bones and left her to watch over the skeleton. Nora carried 2 ammunition crates to Tower North and stacked them against the reinforced wall. Then she did the same for Towers East and West. Tower South was too exposed. She would avoid it unless absolutely necessary. The sun was setting fast now. Temperature would drop hard after dark. She grabbed her field jacket from her bunk in the barracks. The building stood empty except for her gear and the ghosts of soldiers who had rotated home or forward to other positions. Her reflection caught her in a cracked mirror near the latrine. White hair pulled back in a tight bun. Face weathered from years of sun and wind and deployments that blurred together. Gray eyes that had seen too many things end badly. She looked tired. She was tired. But tired did not matter. Not yet. 6 years earlier, Fort Benning, Georgia. The sun hammered down on the rifle range like divine punishment. 23 students stood at attention while Master Sergeant Thomas Beckett walked the line. He moved slowly, deliberately. the way a man moves when he has nothing to prove and everything to teach. They called him Ironside, not to his face, never to his face, but everyone knew the name and the legend behind it. 52 years old, 2 bronze stars from Operation Desert Storm, a Purple Heart from the streets of Mogadishu, where he had carried a wounded officer 800 meters through hostile territory with 2 bullets lodged in his left leg. He walked with a slight limp now. The leg had never fully healed. Neither had something deeper inside him that only other combat veterans recognized. He stopped in front of the only woman in the formation. Nora Ashford, 28 years old, 6 years in the Army, hair already streaked with white like frost spreading across dark glass. She stood at rigid attention, eyes forward, face betraying nothing. Ironside studied her for a long moment. His gaze was clinical, assessing. The look of a man who had trained hundreds of soldiers and could read them like open books. "You think that white hair makes you different, Ashford?" "I am different, Sergeant." "Wrong answer. Different is what other people see. What matters is what you are." He leaned closer. His voice dropped so only she could hear. "That white hair is a gift. It makes them remember you. And what the enemy remembers, the enemy fears. You understand?" "Yes, Sergeant." He stepped back and addressed the entire formation. "A rifle does not care about your background, does not care about your gender, does not care about anything except whether you can put a round where it needs to go when it needs to go there. I am going to teach you how to do that. But more importantly, I am going to teach you how to think." He tapped his temple with one calloused finger. "One bullet, one target. That is the easy part. Any fool can learn to shoot. What matters is making the right decision about when to shoot and when to hold. That decision will save your life or end it. There is no middle ground." The students remained silent, motionless, absorbing every word. Ironside's eyes found Nora again. "Ashford, my office. After training." "Yes, Sergeant." That evening she sat across from him in a cramped office filled with memorabilia from 30 years of service. Photographs of units he had served with. Challenge coins from operations she had only read about. A folded flag in a shadow box that she understood without asking belonged to someone who never came home. He poured 2 cups of coffee, black, no sugar, pushed one across the desk toward her. "You froze on the range today." It was not a question. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I hesitated, Sergeant. It will not happen again. It will happen again, because you do not understand why it happened the first time." He leaned back in his chair, studied her with those eyes that had seen everything. "Tell me about the white hair." She blinked. Whatever she had expected, it was not that. "It started when I was 7, after a fever. The doctors said it was stress-related. It spread through my teens. By the time I was your age, it was complete. And people treated you differently because of it." Not a question, a statement. "Yes, Sergeant. They called me Ghost Girl, Witch, Freak, other things I will not repeat." "And what did you do?" Nora was quiet for a moment, remembering things she had buried deep. "I learned to be invisible, to not draw attention, to fade into the background so they would leave me alone." Ironside nodded slowly. "And now you are training to be a sniper, a profession that requires you to be invisible, to fade into the background, to not draw attention?" He smiled slightly. "Interesting choice. I never thought about it that way." "Start thinking about it." He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out something small and metallic, placed it on the desk between them. A coin, old and worn smooth by decades of handling. On one side, the crossed rifles of the infantry. On the other, 3 words etched in fading script. "Stand your ground." "My father carried that through Korea," Ironside said. "Winter of 1951. Chinese forces surrounded his unit on a frozen hilltop. 12 men against a battalion. No support coming. No extraction possible. What happened? They held for 3 days and 3 nights. 8 of them died on that hill. But when reinforcements finally broke through, the position was still American." He pushed the coin toward her. "My father said those 3 words every night before he slept, right up until the day he passed." Nora picked up the coin carefully, felt its weight in her palm. "Why are you giving this to me, Sergeant?" because you will need it someday. And when that day comes, I want you to remember what I'm about to tell you." He leaned forward, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You have been invisible your whole life because being seen meant being hurt. But that ends now. As a sniper, you will be invisible by choice, by skill, by discipline, not by fear. And when the moment comes, when you cannot be invisible anymore, when you have to stand and fight, you will remember this." He paused. Let the words sink in. Standing your ground is not about being unafraid. Fear is natural. Fear keeps you sharp. Standing your ground is about having something that matters more than the fear. Something worth dying for. Find that thing, Ashford. Hold on to it. Because when the bullets start flying, that thing is the only anchor you will have. She had carried that coin every day since. It was in her pocket now, worn even smoother by her own hands. A talisman against the darkness that always seemed to be closing in. 10 days before the attack. Brigade headquarters. Bagram. The conference room was cold despite the afternoon heat outside. Air conditioning hummed steadily. Major Preston Dwyer sat at the head of the table reviewing deployment rosters on his tablet, with the distracted air of a man who had too many things demanding his attention and too little patience for any of them. Captain Garrett Hollis sat across from him, jaw tight, the posture of a soldier who disagreed with his superior but knew better than to say so directly. Lieutenant Catherine Brennan stood at the wall-mounted display scrolling through personnel files. "FOB Sentinel needs at least minimal staffing until the official closure," Hollis said. "Regulations require it. We cannot just abandon a forward position." Dwyer did not look up from his tablet. "Then find someone to babysit it. 2 weeks. Then we close the books and move on. With respect, sir, a single soldier cannot effectively secure a position designed for 40. Then find someone who can make it look good on paper." Dwyer's voice carried the flat certainty of a man who had already made his decision and resented having to explain it. "The sector is cold. Intel confirms the enemy pulled back 50 kilometers after the January offensive. There is no threat." Brennan pulled up a personnel file on the display. A photograph appeared. White hair, gray eyes, unsmiling face. "What about Staff Sergeant Ashford, currently unassigned after her previous team rotated home? Designated marksman. Exemplary record. Marksmanship scores consistently in the expert range." Hollis frowned. "Ashford is too good to waste on babysitting duty." "Ashford is exactly what we need," Dwyer said, finally looking up. "Quiet, competent, will not cause problems or ask questions. She sits in a tower for 2 weeks, files her reports, and comes home when we close the base. Simple. And if something goes wrong—" "Nothing is going to go wrong, Captain. The sector is cold. Read the intelligence reports." What Dwyer did not mention was the classified folder locked in his desk drawer, the one that described unusual movement patterns in the mountains northwest of Sentinel, the one that suggested enemy forces had not retreated at all. They had repositioned. He did not mention it because mentioning it would delay the base closure. Delaying the closure would delay his transfer to a staff position in Kabul. His promotion depended on streamlining operations in this sector. FOB Sentinel was the last piece of the puzzle. One soldier on a cold base for 2 weeks. Nothing would happen. He was certain of it. Hollis signed the deployment order because that was what captains did. They followed the decisions of majors even when their instincts screamed otherwise. 3 days later, he drove Nora out to FOB Sentinel himself. She said maybe 15 words during the 2-hour trip. When they arrived, she surveyed the base with an expression that revealed nothing. "You will be alone here," Hollis told her. She clearly already knew. "Supply run every 4 days. Radio check twice daily. Anything seems wrong, you call it in immediately." "Yes, sir." "Intel says the area is clear, but stay sharp." "Always do, sir." He wanted to say something more. Something about how this was not punishment. How she was not being forgotten or abandoned. But Nora had already turned away, walking toward the guard tower with her rifle bag slung over her shoulder. White hair bright against her tan uniform. She looked small against the vast empty base. Hollis pushed that thought away. Drove back to headquarters. There were 100 other problems that seemed more urgent. He would remember that drive for the rest of his life. 5 days before the attack. The intelligence came at 16:20 hours on a Tuesday. Enemy communications intercepts indicated a major offensive forming in the eastern provinces. Every available unit was being redirected to reinforce defensive positions. Captain Hollis was coordinating the movement of two companies when Lieutenant Brennan appeared in his doorway. "Sir, what about FOB Sentinel?" Hollis looked at his tactical map. Sentinel sat far from the projected attack zone, isolated, on the wrong side of the province. "Leave it," Dwyer said from across the operations center. He was focused on the larger picture, the pieces that would determine his career trajectory. "We need every vehicle and every soldier for the Eastern Line. One person in a cold sector does not justify pulling resources from the real fight," Brennan pressed. "Sir Ashford is still out there alone. If the intelligence about the Eastern offensive is incomplete, the intelligence is not incomplete." Dwyer's voice carried an edge. "The enemy is moving east. Ashford is safer where she is than in a convoy during active operations. We extract her after we break the offensive." Hollis stared at the map, the small blue icon marking Sentinel, a single soldier. Miles from support, surrounded by terrain that could hide an army. "Radio her. Let her know the situation." Brennan tried, 3 times. Each attempt met with static and silence. Atmospheric interference, equipment malfunction, distance, impossible to determine which. "We will send a bird once things stabilize," Dwyer said. "Ashford knows how to sit tight." The convoy rolled out that evening, heading east toward the sound of distant artillery. Hollis looked back once at the road leading to FOB Sentinel. His gut told him they were making a terrible mistake. But orders were orders, and the war did not pause for one soldier's safety. What no one at headquarters knew was that the Eastern offensive was real but incomplete. A diversion designed to draw American forces away from the true objective. Route Whiskey, the supply corridor that fed 3 forward operating bases. The logistical artery that kept an entire sector operational. Control Route Whiskey and you controlled the valley. Control the valley and you controlled the province. The key to Route Whiskey was a small plateau overlooking the main road. FOB Sentinel. 92 fighters had been gathering in the mountains for weeks. Taliban infantry mixed with something far more dangerous. Chechen mercenaries, veterans of the brutal urban warfare in Grozny. Men who had fought the Russian army to a standstill and learned lessons in blood that they now sold to the highest bidder. Their commander was Ruslan Volkov, former Spetsnaz, 15 years of special operations experience before he went private. He had sold his skills across 3 continents, Chechnya, Central Africa, now Afghanistan. Volkov did not care about ideology, he cared about reputation. His reputation said that when Ruslan Volkov took a contract, the target fell. No exceptions, no failures, no excuses. The contract for FOB Sentinel had come through back channels. Take the base, hold it for 72 hours, cut the supply line, let the Eastern offensive collapse American positions from within. Simple work. Good pay. An empty base with perhaps a token guard or 2. Volkov had studied satellite imagery for weeks, watched American convoys come and go, counted personnel, tracked patterns. When the main force pulled out, leaving only a single soldier behind, he smiled. Even easier than expected. He gave the order to move at sunset. 92 men, AK pattern rifles, RPG-7 launchers, PKM machine guns, 82 mm mortars. Enough firepower to overwhelm a full company. Against 1 soldier, it should have been over in minutes. 19-23 hours. The first warning. Nora was in the operations center reviewing topographic maps by the light of a single LED lantern. She had shut down 2 of the 3 computer terminals to conserve generator fuel. No telling how long she might need power. The motion sensor display began chirping. Southern approach. Multiple contacts. She moved to the window, glassed the area with her rangefinder. Nothing visible in the fading light. But the sensors did not lie. Something was out there, moving toward the base. Could be wild dogs. Could be displaced civilians seeking shelter. Could be a reconnaissance element probing for weaknesses. She had been told the sector was clear. Command had confirmed the enemy pulled back 50 kilometers. That was why they stripped the base. No threat. No need for personnel. But the sensors were telling a different story. Nora grabbed her rifle and moved to Tower North. 20 feet of elevation gave her a commanding view of the terrain in every direction. She scanned the darkening landscape through her scope, breathing slow and even, the way Ironside had taught her. There, movement in the tree line. 800 meters out, not dogs. Too coordinated, not civilians. Too tactical. She counted 6 figures moving in staggered formation, then 3 more behind them. Then she lost count because they melted into shadows and vegetation with the fluid precision of experienced infantry. Her heart rate increased slightly. She controlled it through breathing, through discipline. She counted again, more carefully this time. 12 visible, then 18. Then she saw the shapes that changed everything. RPG tubes silhouetted against the dying light. Heavy machine guns carried by 2-man teams. The unmistakable bulk of mortar components being hauled up the slope. This was not a reconnaissance patrol. This was an assault force, and there were far more than 18. Through her scope, she studied their movement patterns, the hand signals, the spacing between elements, the way they flowed through terrain as a coordinated unit rather than a loose collection of fighters. These were not Taliban farmers with rusty Kalashnikovs. The tactics were Russian, Spetsnaz doctrine. The kind of movement patterns she had studied in classified briefings about Chechen mercenary units operating in the theater. Among the most dangerous fighters in the world, and there were dozens of them coming up the hill. Nora's hand moved to her pocket, found the worn surface of Ironside's coin. 3 words pressed against her palm. Stand your ground. She could run. The thought came to her clearly, without panic. The western perimeter was the weakest point in any encirclement. She could slip out, disappear into the terrain, evade until she reached friendly lines. No one would ever catch her in the dark, but if she ran, they would take the base. They would hold Route Whiskey. The supply convoy scheduled for tomorrow morning would drive into an ambush. 3 forward operating bases would be cut off. Soldiers would die without ammunition or medical supplies. And the civilians in the valley, the villages that depended on American presence for protection, they would be exposed, vulnerable, targets, all because she chose to save herself. Nora thought about her father, Douglas Ashford, Sergeant First Class, 22 years in the Army, Gulf War veteran, Bronze Star recipient, a man who had taught her to shoot when she was 12 and to never back down from anything that mattered. He died when she was 17, heart attack during a training exercise, collapsed on the obstacle course and never got up. The Army gave her a folded flag and condolences. She gave them the next 16 years of her life. At his funeral, she had stood alone at the edge of the crowd, white hair already spreading through her dark locks like frost on autumn leaves. People stared. They always stared. But she remembered what he told her when she was 7 years old, when the white hair first started appearing and the other children made her life miserable. He had knelt beside her, looked her straight in the eyes, spoke words that shaped everything she would become. Different is not weak, sweetheart. Sometimes different is the strongest thing there is. You just have to show them, by standing when they expect you to fall. Standing when they expect you to fall. Nora raised her rifle, settled her eye to the scope, found the lead figure in her crosshairs, 820 meters, wind from the west at 3 kilometers per hour, temperature dropping, humidity low, all factors accounted for. She could take the shot, drop the lead man, announce her presence, confirm the base was not empty. Once she fired, there was no going back, no more running, no more options. The figures kept advancing, 700 meters now, still coming, directly toward the base. No deviation, no hesitation. They knew someone was still here. At 600 meters, they split into 3 groups. Classic assault formation, 2 flanking elements, 1 center thrust. Professional, coordinated. Exactly what she expected from Spetsnaz-trained fighters. 500 meters, 400. At 350 meters, she could see their weapons clearly through her scope. AK-74 rifles, RPG-7 tubes, PKM belt-fed machine guns, men moving with the fluid confidence of veterans who had killed before and expected to kill again. Nora exhaled slowly, settled her crosshairs on center mass of the lead figure. She thought about the convoy tomorrow morning, the soldiers waiting for supplies, the civilians sleeping in their homes. They would never know her name, would never know this night happened. But they were depending on her. That was enough. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot broke the silence at 1947 hours. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The bullet crossed 800 meters in less than a second. Through her scope, she watched the lead figure jerk backward and collapse. The others scattered instantly, vanishing into the terrain like smoke and wind. Fast, disciplined, no panic, just immediate tactical response. Professional. Silence flooded back, deeper than before, pregnant with violence waiting to be born. Nora worked the bolt, chambered another round, scanned for targets. Nothing visible. They had gone to ground in seconds, found cover, eliminated themselves as targets before she could engage again. She counted to 60, watching, waiting. Then from 3 different positions, simultaneously muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Rounds snapped past the tower. Some punched into sandbags with heavy thumps. Others ricocheted off steel supports with high-pitched whines. The air filled with the crack of supersonic bullets passing close enough to kill. Nora dropped below the wall, felt impacts vibrating through concrete beneath her. They had triangulated her position from a single shot. Fast, coordinated, exactly what she expected. She low-crawled to the opposite side of the tower, rose just enough to sight through a gap in the sandbags. 2 figures advancing on the eastern approach. Using cover intelligently, moving in short rushes, she led the first by 2 feet, squeezed. He dropped. The second dove behind a drainage culvert before she could track him. Nora shifted to the southern arc. 3 contacts in fire and maneuver formation, 1 providing cover while 2 advanced, then rotating. Military doctrine executed flawlessly. She targeted the covering man first. 1 shot. He went down. The other 2 froze, their rhythm broken. Nora fired twice more. 1 hit, 1 miss. The survivor vanished into darkness. 4 down, 88 remaining. She moved to Tower East, sprinting across open ground while bullets chased her heels. The tower ladder was exposed, but she climbed fast, rolled into the fighting position just as rounds sparked off the metal rungs below. From this angle, she had clear sight lines on the southern approach. 8 figures moving through the tree line, attempting to flank her previous position. They had not expected her to relocate so quickly. Nora fired methodically, 2 shots, center mass, 1 target dropped, the others scattered. Shift aim, fire again, another hit. But now they knew she was mobile. They knew she was not pinned. They were adapting. Somewhere in the darkness, she knew a commander was issuing new orders, developing new tactics, learning from mistakes. This was going to be a long night. Nora checked her ammunition. 162 rounds remaining. She looked out over the darkening landscape, counted the shadows she could see, estimated the ones she could not. At least 80 fighters still out there. Maybe more. And the night was just beginning. She touched the coin in her pocket. 1 hour down, she whispered to herself. 7 to go. The wind carried the smell of cordite and blood across the plateau. In the distance, the mountains stood a silent witness. They had seen 1,000 battles. They would see 1,000 more. But tonight on this forgotten base, in this forgotten corner of a forgotten war, 1 soldier would write a legend. Whether anyone would survive to tell it remained to be seen. The second hour began with silence. Not peaceful silence. This was the silence of predators circling their wounded prey, calculating, learning, preparing to strike again with greater precision. Nora understood exactly what they were doing. She had studied the same tactics at Fort Benning. When an assault force takes unexpected casualties, they pause, reassess, develop countermeasures. The fact that they had not simply rushed the base in overwhelming numbers meant they respected her capabilities. That respect would keep her alive. For now. She moved through the compound like smoke. Tower North to the Operations Center. Operations Center to the motor pool. Motor pool to Tower East. Never remaining in any position longer than 3 minutes. Never establishing a pattern they could predict or exploit. Ironside had called this Ghost Protocol. Make them see multiple defenders where only one exists. Make them hear gunfire from impossible angles. Make them doubt their intelligence. Make them afraid of shadows. From Tower East, she observed their staging area through her scope. They had withdrawn beyond effective rifle range, consolidating forces, treating wounded, and talking. Extensive radio chatter and hand signals. The unmistakable choreography of men realizing their assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. Good. Every minute they spent planning was another minute she survived. Nora checked her ammunition count. 154 rounds remaining. She had fired 8 rounds and confirmed 6 kills. Exceptional accuracy under combat conditions. But mathematics remained indifferent to exceptional performance. At this consumption rate, she would exhaust her ammunition long before dawn. She needed to be smarter, more selective, more patient. Every bullet had to count for something. The radio in her vest pocket produced nothing but static. She had attempted contact with headquarters every 15 minutes since the attack began. Atmospheric interference, equipment failure, or simply no one listening on the other end. She suspected the latter. The motion sensors displayed enemy positions surrounding the base completely now. Contacts on all 4 approaches. They were establishing a siege perimeter, cutting off escape routes, preparing for a coordinated assault from multiple directions. They believed they had trapped her. They were mistaken. At 2,000 hours, movement appeared on the northern slope. 3 figures low-crawling through scrub brush, attempting to establish a forward observation post. They moved with impressive patience, inches at a time, minimizing their thermal signature. Professional fieldcraft. But Nora had spent 8 years learning to see what others missed. She settled into a prone position behind a concrete barrier, controlled her breathing, waited until the lead crawler raised his head slightly to glass the compound with binoculars. 1 shot. The round traveled 600 meters in less than a second. The observer collapsed without a sound. The other 2 froze. Absolute stillness born of terror. Their partner had died silently. No warning, no muzzle flash visible in the darkness. Just sudden death from nowhere. They began crawling backward, abandoning stealth for survival. Nora let them go. She could have dropped both. Easy shots at that range, but allowing them to live served a tactical purpose. They would return to their commander with fear in their voices. They would describe the phantom sniper who struck without warning or mercy. They would spread doubt and uncertainty through the ranks. Fear was a weapon. Tonight she would wield it without hesitation. By 2100 hours, enemy tactics had evolved. They stopped sending small teams forward. Instead, they began probing with indirect fire, testing her responses, mapping her positions through her reactions. The first mortar round landed at 2107. Nora heard the distinctive thump before the whistle. She was already moving when the round detonated in the vehicle bay. The explosion threw shrapnel against metal walls with a sound like 100 hammers striking simultaneously. 2 more thumps from the darkness beyond the wire. She threw herself into the concrete bunker adjacent to the operations center. The second round struck Tower South directly. The upper platform collapsed in a cascade of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The third round missed entirely, detonating in empty ground beyond the perimeter fence. Ranging shots. They were adjusting fire. The next salvo would bracket her position with lethal precision. Nora refused to give them that opportunity. She grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades from her vest and moved to the eastern perimeter. Through gaps in the concertina wires, she could see movement. A mortar team setting up for another volley. Perhaps 200 meters out. Too far for grenades, but perfect for her rifle. She found a firing position behind a burned-out generator housing. Prone, stable, clear sight line to the target. The mortar crew worked with practiced efficiency. Loader, gunner, spotter. They had done this before, probably in the rubble of Grozny, probably against Russian conscripts who never saw the rounds that killed them. Nora waited for them to silhouette against the sky. The loader stood to drop the next round into the tube. She fired 3 times in rapid succession, not at the men directly, at the mortar tube itself. The first round struck the base plate. The second hit the bipod assembly. The third caught the loader in the hip as he dove for cover. The tube tilted, unfired. The crew abandoned their position and scrambled into darkness. No more mortar fire came that night. Small victories, but small victories accumulated into survival. Nora relocated again. Tower North this time. She needed elevated observation to maintain tactical awareness, but she stayed only long enough to scan the perimeter. 2 minutes maximum. Then she moved again. The enemy was learning. Every time she fired, they marked the position. Concentrated return fire on that location. Attempted to pin her in place, but she was never there when their bullets arrived. Ghost Protocol was working. At 2200 hours, she permitted herself 60 seconds of rest. She was in the operations center. Lights extinguished. Door barricaded with filing cabinets and a heavy desk. The tactical display showed enemy contacts on all approaches. At least 60 still active. Probably more concealed in terrain the sensors could not penetrate. Her shoulder ached from repeated rifle recoil. Her legs burned from constant movement across the compound. Sweat had soaked through her uniform despite the cold night air. She drank from her canteen, slowly, controlled sips. Water discipline mattered when resupply was impossible. Through the reinforced window, she observed flashlights moving in the enemy staging area. They were gathering, consolidating, planning something new. Her mind drifted to another time, another lesson. Fort Benning, a night training exercise that had gone wrong. She had become separated from her unit in unfamiliar terrain. Lost. Alone. The kind of situation that ended careers or lives depending on decisions made in darkness. Ironside had found her 3 hours later, sitting against a tree, rifle ready, eyes scanning the forest. Waiting. "You did not panic," he had observed. "Should I have? Most would. Lost. Alone. No support. Most people fall apart when the familiar structures disappear." He had crouched beside her, studied her face in the moonlight. "What kept you steady?" She had thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I kept thinking about the mission, about what needed to happen next. Not about being lost, just about the next right decision." He had nodded slowly, something like approval in his weathered features. "That is why you will survive when others do not. Most people focus on what they lack. No support, no extraction, no hope. They catalog their disadvantages until fear becomes paralysis. But you focus on what remains possible, what you can still control. That is the difference between soldiers who endure and soldiers who break." She had carried that lesson through 3 deployments, through ambushes and firefights and moments when death seemed certain. Focus on what remains possible. Nora opened her eyes, checked her remaining ammunition. 118 rounds. Still possible. The infiltration came at 22:30. She was in Tower West when the interior motion sensors triggered. 6 contacts inside the perimeter. Southern sector. They had slipped through damaged fencing while she focused on northern and eastern approaches. Classic infiltration doctrine. Fix the defender's attention on one threat, insert another through the gap. They were moving toward the command center. If they seized the interior high ground, the tactical situation would become untenable. She would be trapped between forces inside and outside the wire. She had perhaps 90 seconds before they reached the objective. Nora abandoned the tower, sprinted across open ground toward the command center's rear entrance. Bullets chased her from the perimeter. The infiltration team's external support element had spotted her movement. She made it to cover with seconds to spare. Inside the building, she could hear them stacking on the front entrance, preparing to breach. The scrape of boots on concrete, whispered commands in Russian. They would blow the door, deploy flashbangs, sweep through in coordinated fashion, standard room-clearing procedure, executed by men who had performed it hundreds of times in Chechen apartment blocks and Afghan compounds. Nora pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade, counted 2 seconds, hurled it through the gap between door and frame just as they prepared to breach. She hit the floor as detonation shook the building. Screams. Confusion. The acrid smell of explosives mixing with copper tang of blood. She threw the second grenade before they could recover. When smoke began clearing, she moved to the front entrance. Rifle up, scanning through the haze. 4 of the 6 were down, motionless or writhing. The remaining 2 had fled back toward the perimeter. Nora checked the fallen for survivors, found none still capable of fighting. She secured the command center, swept adjacent rooms for additional infiltrators, found the building clear. Her hands remained steady throughout, breathing controlled. But something cold had settled in her chest, a weight she recognized from previous deployments. These men had families somewhere, mothers who would receive news that destroyed them, children who would grow up with absence where a father should be. She had made that happen. War demanded such transactions, necessary sometimes, but always ugly beneath the tactical language and mission objectives. Nora filed those thoughts away. There would be time for reflection later, if she survived. Ammunition count, 106 rounds. Fewer grenades now, and approximately 55 enemy fighters remained outside the wire. The mathematics continued deteriorating. The bullet found her at 2203. She was transitioning between positions, a movement she had executed a dozen times already that night, running from the command center toward Tower East along a route she had used 3 times without incident. They had been watching, learning, waiting. Automatic fire erupted from 2 directions simultaneously. Crossfire. They had established an ambush along her movement corridor. Most rounds missed. Hitting a running target in darkness was difficult even for trained professionals. One round connected. It struck her left shoulder just below the edge of her body armor. The bullet punched through muscle and exited cleanly through the back. Nora went down hard. Pain detonated through her body like white phosphorus. Her left arm went numb, then burning, then numb again as shock began its anesthetic work. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she rolled behind cover on pure instinct. She pressed her right hand against the wound. Blood welled between her fingers, warm and steady, but not the pulsing arterial flow that meant death in minutes. Not immediately fatal, but serious enough to change everything. Her left arm was compromised. Every movement sent lightning through her shoulder. Fine motor control had vanished. She could still move the arm with effort, but reliability was gone. The enemy knew they had scored a hit. She could hear excited voices calling positions to each other, coordinating follow-up to exploit her vulnerability. Nora forced herself to focus despite the pain. Breathe through it, accept it, acknowledge its presence without surrendering to its demands. She pulled out her individual first aid kit one-handed, packed the wound with gauze, secured it with tape that would not hold properly but would have to serve. No time for proper treatment, not with enemy fighters advancing on her position. Blood flow slowed, not stopped but reduced to manageable seepage. She grabbed her rifle, braced it against the wall with only her right arm. The enemy was closing on her location, 3 figures visible through swirling dust, moving with the confidence of hunters who smelled blood. They believed she was finished. She fired 3 one-handed shots, awkward, unsteady, close range, all 3 connected. The advance halted. Survivors retreated, dragging casualties, but she had revealed her injury. They had observed her firing one-handed, seen her favoring her right side. They knew she was wounded now, alone, running low on ammunition, bleeding. From darkness beyond the perimeter, a voice emerged, English words spoken with heavy Russian accent. Belly Prizrak. White ghost. Nora remained motionless. We know you are alone. We know you are wounded. We have observed you moving through the compound. Always the same woman. White hair like winter snow. Fighting like something not entirely human. She said nothing. You fight with exceptional skill. We acknowledge this. The men you have killed were professionals, veterans of difficult campaigns, yet you have bested them. This deserves recognition. Silence from her position. But mathematics do not favor you. Look at yourself. One arm damaged. Ammunition depleting. How many rounds remain 60-50? How many hours until dawn your people departed? They drove away without looking back. Why sacrifice yourself for those who abandoned you? The words found cracks in her armor that bullets had not. Surrender now. Walk through the gate with hands raised. We will treat your wounds. Provide water and food. You will be a prisoner, yes, but you will breathe. You will see another sunrise. Is this position worth your life? Is that flag worth your blood? The voice paused, waiting for response. Nora remained silent. Consider carefully, Belly Prizrak. Perhaps 1 hour before we come again. Use that time wisely. The voice ceased. Night returned to tense stillness. Nora leaned against concrete, breathing through waves of pain, processing his words despite herself. He was not wrong about the facts. Command had left her here. One soldier on an empty base scheduled for closure. If she died tonight, they would file reports. Perhaps a commendation. Then they would forget her like they forgot everyone who fell in forgotten places. Was this position worth dying for? She reached into her pocket, found the coin, pressed it against her palm until the edges hurt. Stand your ground, not for recognition, not for medals, not for officers who made decisions from air-conditioned headquarters, for the supply convoy at Urs 600, for soldiers at forward bases waiting for ammunition and medicine, for civilians in the valley sleeping under assumption that someone stood between them and darkness. They would never know her name, but they were depending on her. That had to be enough. Nora reloaded her rifle, verified her remaining ammunition, 94 rounds. The coin returned to her pocket. She whispered to the darkness, "Come and try." At midnight they obliged. The assault came from east and north simultaneously. 12 figures on the eastern approach, moving in staggered formation. 8 emerging from a dry creek bed on the northern flank. 20 fighters, coordinated, aggressive, done with patience. Nora could not cover both approaches from any single position, so she created the illusion that she could. She fired 3 rapid shots toward the eastern group. 1 hit, 2 deliberate misses designed to scatter their formation. Then she sprinted across the compound toward Tower North. She arrived just as the northern element emerged from concealment. 4 more shots, 2 confirmed hits. Survivors dove for cover, back to the east. That group had advanced during her absence. They had reached the outer fence line, dangerously close. She engaged from ground level this time, firing from behind the generator housing she had used earlier. Different angle now, different elevation. 3 shots, 1 hit, 2 misses spaced wide for psychological effect. Then to the motor pool, firing from windows of a damaged Humvee, then to the command center roof, then to a shallow depression behind sandbags that she had identified during her first afternoon at the base. Each time she fired, she varied the pattern. Single shots, double taps, bursts of 3, long pauses followed by rapid fire, making them believe multiple defenders occupied multiple positions. The assault faltered, stopped, dissolved into confusion. She could hear them shouting conflicting reports. Someone insisting they had identified muzzle flashes from 5 different positions. Another claiming at least 3 shooters were operating independently. They formed defensive perimeters, orienting toward phantom threats, firing at shadows and suspicion. Ghost protocol was working. At 0030 hours, they attempted direct breach. A fire team rushed the main gate under covering fire. 6 men moving fast, weapons up, no subtlety, pure aggressive momentum. Nora let them reach the gate. Let them believe they had successfully breached the perimeter. During her first week at Sentinel, she had improved defensive positions where possible. One improvement was a fragmentation grenade rigged to the gate's internal mechanism, a simple tripwire connected to a pull ring detonator. When the assault team forced the gate open, the wire pulled taut. The explosion caught 4 of them directly. The other 2 retreated, dragging wounded, screaming. Covering fire intensified but became undirected. Anger and frustration rather than tactical precision. They were shooting at positions they imagined rather than positions she occupied. Nora used the chaos to relocate to Tower East. From elevated positions, she identified 2 fighters who had exposed themselves while firing blindly. 2 more shots, 2 more confirmed kills. Silence descended again, heavy, expectant. Nora checked ammunition, 71 rounds remaining. 27 enemy casualties by her count, but they continued adapting, continued learning, and they still possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. She had position, she had darkness, she had will. It would have to be sufficient. At 0100 hours, Nora heard them on the radio frequency she had been monitoring since the attack began. She did not speak Russian, but one phrase repeated through their transmissions. Beli Prizrak, the white ghost. Their vocal tone had transformed since the battle's opening hour. Earlier, they had communicated with professional confidence. Now something else threaded through the tactical chatter. Something that sounded remarkably like fear. They had observed her hair, that distinctive white signature visible under moonlight. appearing and disappearing across the compound like something that defied natural law. She had engaged from positions that should have been impossible to reach in the time available. She had killed their fighters from angles they could not anticipate or explain. And she was still fighting, hour after hour, when logic dictated she should be dead or fled or broken. They had given her a name born from that inexplicable persistence. In Chechen folklore, Nora knew there were stories of white spirits haunting battlefields, souls of warriors who refused death, who continued fighting long after mortal bodies should have failed. Soldiers everywhere were superstitious, even professionals, especially professionals. They had witnessed too many things that defied rational explanation. Now they faced what appeared to be a legend made flesh. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Fear degraded tactical decision-making. Fear created hesitation. Fear was a weapon she would deploy without mercy. At 0012, she heard them arguing. Radio traffic had intensified. Heated voices. Disagreement. She could not understand specific words but recognized the tone. They were debating whether to continue or withdraw. 30-plus casualties to a single defender. Professional pride demanded completion. Tactical pragmatism suggested the cost had become prohibitive. Nora decided to influence their deliberation. She had been conserving the .50 caliber ammunition for the heavy machine gun in Tower North. 12 rounds. Too precious for individual targets. But psychological impact now outweighed ammunition conservation. She climbed to Tower North, uncovered the M2 Browning, loaded the short belt. Through her scope, she observed their staging area clearly. Vehicles, supply cache, command element gathered around portable displays. She did not aim at personnel. She aimed at the fuel truck. The .50 caliber round punched through the tank like tissue paper. Fuel sprayed. Contacted hot metal somewhere in the engine compartment. Ignited. The vehicle erupted into a fireball that illuminated the mountainside like premature dawn. Secondary explosions followed in rapid succession. Ammunition in adjacent vehicles cooking off. Grenades detonating in sympathetic chains. Men scattering as silhouettes against flames. Nora placed 4 more heavy rounds into the chaos. Targeting equipment, supplies, infrastructure. When she ceased fire, their staging area was burning wreckage. Radio traffic went silent. Then voices returned. Different tone now. Not arguing. Deciding. A single voice emerged. Calm despite the destruction visible behind him. Cold and controlled. The voice of a commander who had just watched significant assets disappear but refused to acknowledge defeat. Volkov. It had to be Volkov. He spoke for several minutes. Other voices responded with affirmative tones. They were not withdrawing. They had invested too much to retreat. Pride would not permit it. Reputation would not survive it. Ruslan Volkov would not accept it. The mission had transformed. No longer purely tactical, now personal. The White Ghost had to die tonight, not because operational objectives required it, because Volkov could not return to the mercenary world having been defeated by one American woman with white hair. Good. Angry opponents made mistakes, and Nora was counting on mistakes. She descended from Tower North, checked remaining resources. 47 rifle rounds, 7 rounds remaining for the M2, 1 smoke grenade, 1 flare. At least 40 enemy fighters still combat effective outside the perimeter. The mathematics had reached approximate parity. 47 bullets, 40 enemies. But parity did not account for her wounded arm, did not account for 8 hours of continuous combat draining every physical and mental reserve, did not account for the certainty that those 40 men were preparing something decisive. Nora moved to the operations center, found a corner where she could observe multiple approaches while resting briefly. Her shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. Blood had begun seeping through the makeshift bandage again. She needed proper medical attention, needed IV fluids to replace blood loss, needed rest that was impossible. None of those things would arrive before dawn. She thought about Ironside again, their final conversation before she deployed to Afghanistan. They had spoken by phone. He was retired by then, living in a small house near Fort Benning, still teaching occasionally as a civilian contractor, still passing hard-earned wisdom to the next generation. "You remember what I told you about standing your ground?" he had asked. "Every day, Sergeant." "Good, because someday you will face a moment when standing is the only option, when retreat means something worse than dying, when the only path forward goes straight through hell. And when that moment comes, you will not be alone, even when no one stands beside you, even when radio is dead and reinforcements are not coming. You carry everyone who ever stood their ground, every soldier throughout history who chose duty over survival. They are all there with you, in your blood, in your training, in that coin I gave you. She had managed a tired laugh. That is unusually poetic for you, Sergeant. Getting old makes a man philosophical. He had paused. Stay alive out there, Ashford. And remember, 1 hour at a time. That is how you survive the impossible. Do not think about everything at once. Just get through the next hour, then the next. Before you know it, sunrise arrives. 1 hour at a time. Nora checked her watch. 01 fem hours. She had been fighting for nearly 6 hours. Less than 5 hours until dawn. She could survive 5 hours. She had to survive 5 hours. The enemy was regrouping in darkness, preparing their final assault. She could feel it approaching like storm pressure building before lightning. Let it come. She stood, grabbed her rifle, moved to the window. Through smoke still rising from their destroyed staging area, she could see figures massing. A significant concentration. They were committing everything remaining for one overwhelming push. This was it. Final assault. Everything they had left thrown against the wire. Nora touched the coin in her pocket one final time. 1 more hour, she whispered, then another, until sunrise. Outside, the enemy began their advance, and Staff Sergeant Nora Ashford prepared to meet them. They came at 01:30 hours. 40 figures emerged from darkness like a tide of shadows. No more flanking maneuvers. No more infiltration attempts. No more probing attacks to test her responses. Just overwhelming force advancing across open ground in a broad skirmish line. The final assault. Nora watched them through her scope from a ground-level position near the motor pool. She had abandoned the towers. Too predictable now. Too easy to target with concentrated fire. She needed mobility more than elevation for what was coming. At the center of the advancing line, one figure moved differently than the others. Taller, more controlled. Walking with the measured confidence of a man who had led assaults across 3 continents and never tasted defeat. Volkov. He was coming personally. The mercenary commander who had staked everything on this contract. Who had lost 64 men to a single woman with white hair. Who could not return to his world having failed so completely. In different circumstances, Nora might have respected that commitment. A warrior's pride carried to its ultimate conclusion. But these were not different circumstances. This was survival, and she intended to survive. She settled into her shooting position, rifle braced against a concrete barrier, wounded left arm hanging useless at her side, breathing slow despite the pain pulsing through her shoulder with every heartbeat. 47 rounds, 40 targets. The mathematics had achieved a kind of terrible balance. She thought about her father in that moment, not consciously. The memory simply arrived unbidden. Douglas Ashford standing in their backyard in Georgia when she was 12 years old, teaching her to shoot with a .22 rifle that felt enormous in her small hands. Squeeze the trigger, he had instructed. Never pull, never jerk. Squeeze like you are pressing a button that might break if you push too hard. She had missed the first 10 shots entirely, frustrated, embarrassed, ready to quit. He had knelt beside her, placed his calloused hand over hers on the rifle stock. Shooting is not about the gun, he had said. It is about stillness, finding the quiet place inside yourself where nothing moves except your intention. Find that place and the bullet goes where you want it to go. She had found that place, eventually, after hundreds of hours of practice, after thousands of rounds fired at paper targets that became steel silhouettes, that became qualification courses, that became enemy combatants in places whose names most Americans could not pronounce. She found it now, the quiet place, the stillness. The enemy was 300 meters out. Nora began firing. First shot, center mass on a figure at the right flank. He dropped without a sound. Work the bolt. Acquire next target. Squeeze, second shot. Another collapse, third, fourth, fifth. She fired with mechanical precision, not rapid, not panicked. the way Ironside had taught her during those endless hours at Fort Benning. One round every 3 seconds. Pick the target, account for movement, squeeze, transition to the next. The assault line began to waver. Men on the flanks were falling. No cover on the open ground. Nowhere to hide from the ghost who could not be killed. But they kept coming. Volkov's will driving them forward, his voice carrying across the darkness. Commands in Russian that she did not need to understand. The meaning was clear. Advance. Do not stop. Overwhelm her through sheer numbers. 10 rounds fired, 8 confirmed hits, 15 rounds, 12 hits, 20 rounds, 16 hits, 23 rounds in 2 minutes, 14 confirmed kills. The ground behind the assault line was scattered with bodies and crawling wounded. Still they came. Nora fired her remaining rifle ammunition. 24 more shots, 18 hits. Each impact precisely placed. Each trigger squeeze deliberate, despite the burning in her shoulder and the exhaustion dragging at her limbs. Then the rifle clicked empty. She dropped the magazine, reached for another, found nothing. All rifle ammunition was gone. The assault line was still advancing, reduced but determined. Perhaps 15 figures still on their feet, closing the distance with desperate speed. 200 meters, 150, 100. Nora slung the empty rifle across her back, drew her pistol, 15 rounds. She moved through the motor pool, using vehicles for concealment. The engagement distance favored handguns now. Close quarters where accuracy mattered more than volume of fire. They hit the perimeter fence at 0145, cutting through wire, climbing over barriers, pushing through gaps. They had lost nearly half their force in the final advance, but the survivors were committed. No retreat, no surrender. Kill the ghost or die trying. Nora waited behind the burned-out Humvee, controlled her breathing despite pain and exhaustion, steadied her grip on the pistol. The first figure came around the corner. She fired twice, both rounds center mass. He collapsed. 2 more behind him. 4 shots, both dropped. 9 rounds remaining. Movement on her left. She spun, fired, hit. 8 rounds. Another figure emerging from behind a cargo container. 2 shots, 1 hit, 1 miss, 6 rounds. They were adapting even now, using vehicles for cover, attempting to flank her position. She could not cover every angle with a handgun and a wounded arm. Automatic fire erupted from her right. Rounds sparked off concrete inches from her head. She dropped, rolled, came up firing. 2 shots, 1 hit, 4 rounds. 3 figures rushed her position simultaneously, coming from different angles. Too many targets for 4 rounds. Nora made calculations in fractions of seconds. She shot the first in the chest, the second in the leg to drop him. The third was too close for aim fire. His rifle barked. She threw herself sideways, felt rounds pass through space where she had been standing, came up inside his reach, jammed the pistol against his chest, fired twice. He dropped. 1 round remaining, 1 enemy visible. Coming around the corner of the motor pool building, AK raised, finger on trigger, Nora fired her last bullet. Miss! The round sparked off concrete behind him. He flinched but did not fall, steadied his aim. She was dead. She knew it with absolute certainty. No ammunition, no cover, no time. But her body refused to accept what her mind understood. She threw the empty pistol at his face. He flinched, raised his arm to block. That gave her half a second. She closed the distance in 2 steps, grabbed the barrel of his AK, pushed it sideways as he fired. Muzzle blast scorched her hand. Rounds went wide, knee to his groin. He doubled over. She ripped the rifle from his grip, slammed the stock into his temple. He went down. Nora stood over him, breathing hard, the captured AK in her hands. She checked the magazine. Half full, perhaps 15 rounds, a gift from the enemy. But there was no time for gratitude. More were coming. She could hear them in the compound, shouting, searching. 4 more at least. And Volkov. Nora moved through the motor pool like a ghost living up to her name. The captured AK felt unfamiliar. Different balance, different trigger pull. But a weapon was a weapon. She found 2 of them near the operations center. moving as a pair, covering each other with professional precision. She waited until both were in her sight line. Opened fire. The AK bucked harder than her rifle, less accurate at distance, but at 20 meters precision was less critical than volume. Both men went down. Two more somewhere in the compound. And Volkov. Nora circled toward the command center. That was where they would go. The high ground. The defensible position. The objective they had been trying to seize all night. She found them at the command center entrance. Two fighters working on the barricaded door, trying to force their way inside. She shot them from behind. No warning. No hesitation. War had rules and training manuals. In the darkness at 0200 hours, the only rule was survival. The bodies fell. The compound went silent. Almost silent. One set of footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming around the corner of the command center. Nora spun. Raised the AK. Ruslan Volkov stood 15 meters away. His rifle trained on her chest. They faced each other in flickering light from fires still burning in the destroyed staging area. Two warriors at the end of a very long night. Both wounded, both exhausted, both refusing to yield. He was exactly what she had expected. Tall, broad shoulders, face carved from stone, eyes that had witnessed everything the world could offer and decided none of it mattered except the next kill. Belly Prizorak, he said. His voice was calm despite everything, almost conversational. The white ghost. At last we meet face to face. Nora said nothing. 64 of my men dead, 28 wounded or fled, all from one woman. He tilted his head slightly, the gesture of a predator studying prey. I have fought across 3 continents. Americans, Russians, Africans. None have cost me what you have cost me tonight. Then you should leave. No. His expression did not change. I cannot leave. You understand this. Yes, my reputation, my future contracts, my entire existence depends on completing objectives. If I return having lost to a single American woman with white hair, I am finished. No one will hire Ruslan Volkov again. No one will fear his name. That is not my concern. No, but it is the reason one of us must die here. He paused, studied her with unsettling intensity. You are wounded, exhausted. That rifle is unfamiliar to you. At this distance, we both fire. We both hit. We both die. Neither of us wants that outcome. Nora felt the truth in his words. Her shoulder was screaming. Her arms were shaking. She could not guarantee a killing shot before he pulled his trigger. Or, Volkov continued, we resolve this differently. He lowered his rifle, slowly, deliberately, set it on the ground at his feet. Then he drew a knife from his belt. Long blade, combat design, the weapon of a man who had killed at arm's length many times. Blades, he said. You and me. Winner takes the base. Dies with honor or lives with victory. Your choice. It was insane. She was wounded. He was fresh by comparison. Larger, stronger, trained in Spetsnaz close-quarters combat that had been refined through decades of brutal application. But if they both fired, they both died. And she still had people depending on her. The convoy at dawn, the soldiers waiting for supplies, the civilians who would never know her name. She could not afford a draw. Nora lowered the AK, set it down, drew her knife. Volkov smiled. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Brave, perhaps foolish. We will discover which. He came at her fast. The first strike was a feint. She recognized the setup and slipped sideways, but he was already adjusting. The second strike came low, aimed at her wounded side. She blocked with her knife, felt the impact jar through her entire arm. He was strong. Each blow drove her backward despite her attempts to hold ground. She could not match him strength for strength. Had to use speed, timing, precision. He overextended on a thrust. She stepped inside his reach, drove her elbow into his face, felt cartilage crack beneath the impact. He stumbled backward, blood streaming from his broken nose, but he did not fall, did not slow. He came again, faster now, angrier, the precise Spetsnaz technique giving way to something raw, more primal. Nora ducked a slash that would have opened her throat, countered with a strike toward his forearm. The blade bit deep into muscle. He grunted but kept coming. They circled each other, both bleeding now, both breathing hard. Two predators, too committed to disengage. He rushed her again. She sidestepped. Too slow. His knife caught her already wounded shoulder. Fresh agony exploded through her body. She screamed but kept moving, kept fighting. Her counterstrike caught him across the thigh. Deep cut through fabric and flesh. He staggered. For a moment they stood facing each other, both wounded, both refusing to fall, both understanding that the next exchange would likely be the last. "You should have fled when you had the chance," Volkov said. His voice was strained now. "When the convoy left, you could have disappeared into the mountains, lived." "I do not run." Nora's voice emerged as a rasp. "That is not what I do." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. One warrior acknowledging another. "No, I see that now. Whatever happens here, Beli Prizrak, know that you have earned my respect. Very few ever have." He raised his knife for a final strike. Nora prepared to meet it. And then gunfire erupted from outside the compound. Not AK fire, not the weapons his men carried. M4 rifles. American weapons. Volkov's head snapped toward the sound, confusion crossing his features for the first time all night. "Impossible," he breathed. "There are no American forces within." He never finished the sentence. Nora lunged, drove her knife into his side, twisted. He gasped, tried to bring his own blade around. She caught his wrist, held it, pushed her knife deeper. His legs buckled. He fell to his knees. She stood over him, watching comprehension dawn in his eyes, understanding that he had made the oldest mistake. He had allowed himself to be distracted. "First lesson they teach," Nora said quietly. "Never take your eyes off the threat." Volkov looked up at her, blood bubbling between his lips, but somehow, impossibly, he was smiling. "Belia Prizrak," he whispered. "They will remember you. Long after they forget me. Long after they forget this war. They will remember the white ghost who held the line alone." He collapsed forward, moved once, then was still. Nora pulled her knife free, wiped it on his jacket, sheathed it. The gunfire outside was intensifying. American voices shouting commands. The distinctive rhythm of professional soldiers clearing a hostile area. She walked toward the main gate on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Every step was agony. Every breath was fire in her lungs. But she was walking. She was still standing. The gate stood open. Figures in American combat gear were pouring through, securing positions, engaging remaining enemy fighters who had attempted to flee. At the front of the formation, a familiar face, Captain Garrett Hollis. He stopped when he saw her, weapon lowering, expression shifting through shocked disbelief and something that looked very much like shame. "Ashford," his voice cracked on her name. "My God, Ashford." Nora drew herself to attention. It required everything she had left. Her wounded arm hung useless at her side. Blood soaked her uniform from shoulder to waist. Dirt and smoke and worse things covered her face. But she was standing. "Staff Sergeant Ashford reporting, sir." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Fobb's Sentinel remains secure." Hollis stared at her, then at the compound behind her. The bodies, the destruction, the evidence of a battle that should have been impossible. "How many Hui?" He managed. 92 enemy combatants engaged, sir. And you held them, alone, for 8 hours." "Yes, sir, that is correct." Lieutenant Brennan appeared beside Hollis. Her face had gone pale. She was staring at the body count, trying to process what she was witnessing. "Sir, we are counting at least 60 enemy KIA, possibly more. The wounded who fled." 64 killed, Nora said. 28 wounded or retreated. I maintained count throughout the engagement. Silence fell over the compound. Hollis looked at her. Really looked. The white hair matted with blood and grime. The gray eyes that had seen too much in one night. The body that should have collapsed hours ago but refused to fall. "Command will recommend you for the Medal of Honor," he said quietly. Nora shook her head. "I do not want a medal, sir. You held an entire forward operating base against a battalion strength element, single-handed, For 8 hours. You saved the supply convoy. You probably saved 100 lives. Maybe more. You deserve recognition. I held my post. Her voice was fading now, adrenaline wearing thin, reality of her wounds asserting itself. That is the job. That is what soldiers do. Hollis wanted to say more. She could see the words forming, the guilt, the apology he could not articulate. But before he could speak, her legs finally surrendered. She fell. Hollis caught her, lowered her gently to the ground. Medic, he shouted. Medic, now get over here. Soldiers rushed toward them, hands reaching for her, voices calling for equipment and evacuation. Nora looked up at the sky. The first gray light of dawn was touching the edges of the mountains. Stars were fading. Darkness was retreating. She had made it. The coin was still in her pocket. She could feel its weight against her leg. Stand your ground. She had. Everything after that was just noise. 3 days later. Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Nora woke in a hospital bed with clean sheets and an IV line in her arm. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of antiseptic and clean linen replaced cordite and blood. Her shoulder was properly bandaged now. Professional work by actual surgeons rather than her own desperate field dressing. The pain remained but was muffled by medication. Lieutenant Brennan sat in a chair beside the bed. She stood when Nora's eyes opened. Welcome back, Sergeant. You have been unconscious for almost 40 hours. Nora tried to speak. Her throat was dessert dry. Brennan handed her a cup of water. Take it slow. Doctors said you were severely dehydrated, lost significant blood volume. Going to take time to recover fully. Nora sipped carefully. Let the water restore something of her voice. The base, she managed. Secure. You held it. Brennan's voice was quiet, almost reverent. Supply convoy reached forward positions on schedule. 0 casualties. Because of you. Nora closed her eyes, felt something unclench in her chest, a tension she had not realized she was still carrying. There is more, Brennan continued. Captain Hollis filed a comprehensive report, including his concerns about Major Dwyer. Nora opened her eyes. Dwyer buried intelligence reports indicating enemy activity in your sector. He knew there was a potential threat and suppressed the information. Investigation is ongoing, but he has already been relieved of command. Court-martial is probable. Nora processed this. The man whose career ambitions had left her to die would face justice. It should have felt like victory. It just felt tired. There is someone here to see you, Brennan said, if you are feeling up to it. Nora nodded weakly. Brennan stepped out. A moment later, another figure entered. Tall, weathered, walking with that distinctive limp she remembered from Fort Benning. Thomas Beckett, Ironside. He looked older than her memory, grayer, the lines on his face carved deeper by additional years. But his eyes remained the same, sharp, knowing, seeing everything worth seeing. He stood beside her bed for a long moment without speaking, just looking at her, taking measure of who she had become since she left his classroom. I heard what you did, he said finally. His voice was rougher than she remembered, emotion he was trying to control. Nora said nothing. 92 enemy combatants. 8 hours. 1 soldier. He shook his head slowly. They are calling you the White Ghost now. Story is spreading through the entire military. Probably reached the civilian press within the week. The Chechens gave me that name. It fits. He pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down with the careful movements of a man whose body had accumulated too many injuries over too many decades. You are going to be famous, Ashford, whether you want it or not. I do not want fame. I know. He reached into his pocket, pulled out something small and metallic, placed it in her palm. A coin, identical to the one she had carried for 6 years. Same crossed rifles, same 3 words, stand your ground. I had 2, Beckett said. My father gave them to me when I enlisted. One for myself, one to pass on to the soldier who would need it most. He paused. Took me 30 years to find that soldier. Nora stared at the coin, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. You already gave me one. Now you have 2, one to carry, one to pass on when the time comes. His weathered hand covered hers. Someday you will find another soldier standing at the edge of something impossible. wondering if they can make it through. You will recognize them because you were once where they are, and you will know what they need. She looked up at him, the man who had taught her everything that mattered. How will I know when I have found them? You will know. His voice carried absolute certainty. That is the nature of what we do. We recognize our own. He stood, looked down at her with an expression she had never seen from him before. Pride, unguarded and complete. I am proud of you, Nora. First time he had ever used her first name. Your father would be proud too. Everything he taught you, everything I tried to teach you, you proved it all that night. He walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Get well, come home, and then get back to work. There are still lessons to teach, still soldiers who need to learn them. Then he was gone. Nora lay in the hospital bed, both coins clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face despite her best efforts to contain them. She had held the line. Now she understood why. Not for medals or recognition, not for officers who made decisions from comfortable headquarters, not even for the abstract concept of duty that they taught in training, for the soldier who would come after her, the one who would face their own impossible night, who would need to know that standing was possible, that one person in the right place with sufficient will could make a difference. She would teach them, the way Ironside had taught her. The lesson would continue. 6 months later, Fort Benning, Georgia. The Army made Nora a training instructor at the marksmanship unit. They offered her other positions, recruiting, public affairs, staff assignments that would have been easier on her still healing shoulder. She refused them all. She wanted to teach. Her first class assembled on a rifle range that looked exactly like the one where Ironside had trained her years before. 23 faces looked back at her, young, eager, nervous, unaware of what awaited them. My name is Staff Sergeant Ashford. I am going to teach you how to shoot accurately under combat conditions. But more importantly, I'm going to teach you how to think clearly when everything around you is chaos. She held up the worn coin, the original, the one that had been in her pocket through the longest night of her life. Can anyone tell me what this says? Silence, confused looks. Stand your ground, Nora said. 3 words, simple enough to understand, impossible to truly learn until you have lived them. She looked at each face in turn. Someday each of you will face a moment when retreat seems like the smart choice, when the numbers are against you, when support is not coming, when everything rational tells you to run. She pocketed the coin. In that moment you will discover who you really are. Not who you think you are, not who you want to be, who you actually are when everything else is stripped away. I cannot give you that answer. No instructor can. You have to find it yourself. But I can give you the skills you will need when that moment arrives. The discipline, the precision, the mindset that transforms fear into focus. She picked up a rifle from the table before her. 1 bullet, 1 target, 1 decision. That is where everything begins. Master that and you master yourself. Master yourself and you can stand when others fall. She turned toward the range. Now, let us begin. 20 years later. Sergeant Major Nora Ashford stood at the edge of the rifle range at Fort Benning as dawn painted the Georgia sky in shades of gold and rose. 69 years old now. White hair that had once made her different now simply made her memorable. The face in the mirror each morning showed every year of service. Every deployment, every student trained, every lesson passed on. Her shoulder still ached on cold mornings. The scar tissue would never fully heal. Some wounds stayed with you forever. Behind her, the training facility was quiet. Students would not arrive for another hour. This time belonged to her alone. She raised her rifle, the same M110 she had carried at Fob Sentinel, maintained with obsessive care across 2 decades. A weapon that had become an extension of her will. Settled into shooting position, controlled her breathing despite arthritis in her fingers, and the old wound that never stopped reminding her of its presence. Acquired the target. 600 meters. Steel silhouette waiting patiently for her bullet. Squeezed the trigger. The round crossed the distance in an instant. Struck the silhouette dead center with a distinctive ring of metal on metal. Perfect shot. Nora lowered the rifle, allowed herself a small smile. Still had it. After everything, still had it. Footsteps approached from behind. She turned to see a young soldier, female, early 20s, dark hair, expression caught between determination and uncertainty. Sergeant Major Ashford. Nora nodded. I am Private First Class Morrison. They told me to report to you for additional training. What is your problem, Morrison? The young soldier hesitated. Ma'am, every soldier sent to me has a problem, something holding them back, something they cannot overcome alone. What is yours? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then softly. I freeze, under pressure, in simulations, live fire exercises. Everything is fine until it matters. Then I just stop. Nora studied her, saw something familiar in the set of her jaw, the way she held herself. Shame she was trying to hide. Follow me. She led Morrison to a private section of the range, sat her down on a bench, took a seat beside her. When I was 28, I froze too. First real combat deployment. Had a clear shot, could not take it. My team leader had to save my life because I hesitated. Morrison stared at her, clearly not expecting this from the legendary white ghost. My instructor found out. Man named Beckett. Could have ended my career. Instead, he gave me this. She pulled the coin from her pocket. The original, worn smooth by 40 years of handling. He taught me what these words really mean, not just the surface meaning, the deeper truth underneath. What did you learn? That freezing is not about cowardice, it is about focus. When pressure arrives, your mind scatters in every direction. Too many threats, too many possibilities. You cannot process everything, so you process nothing. Morrison nodded slowly, recognition dawning. The solution is not eliminating fear. Fear is natural. Fear keeps you sharp. The solution is narrowing your focus until only one thing exists. One bullet, one target, one decision. Everything else disappears. Nora reached into her pocket, found the second coin, the one Ironside had given her in the hospital at FOB Phoenix. She pressed it into Morrison's palm. I have carried this for 20 years, waiting for the right soldier to give it to. Someone standing at the edge of something difficult. Someone who needs to know that standing is possible. Morrison looked at the coin, then at Nora. Why me? You do not know me. I know exactly who you are. You are who I was 40 years ago. Talented, determined, terrified that your fear makes you weak. Nora smiled. It does not. Your fear makes you human. What you do with that fear makes you a soldier. She stood, gestured toward the range. We are going to work together until that freeze disappears, until focus becomes automatic, until you can stand in the middle of chaos and see only what matters. How long will that take? As long as necessary. Nora picked up a rifle, handed it to her. That coin comes with a responsibility. When you understand what it means, truly understand, you will pass it on to another soldier who needs it. That is how the lesson continues. That is how we keep each other standing. Morrison looked at the coin one more time, then at Nora. I will not let you down, Sergeant Major. I know you will not. Nora turned toward the targets waiting in the morning light. Now, let us begin. That evening, Nora sat on the porch of her small house near the base. The house she had bought when she finally accepted that the Army was her life and this place was her home. Sunset painted the Georgia sky in colors that reminded her of Afghanistan, of a dawn that arrived after the longest night of her life. 2 photographs hung on the wall inside. The first showed a tattered American flag still flying over FOB Sentinel, photographed the morning after the battle by someone on Hollis's team. Holes torn through the fabric by bullets that had been meant for her. The second showed Thomas Beckett smiling on the day she graduated from sniper school. He had died 5 years ago, peacefully, in his sleep. The way old soldiers deserved to go, but rarely did. She missed him every day. But he was not truly gone. He lived on in every lesson she taught, every soldier she trained, every time someone stood when they could have fallen. That was the real legacy. Not medals, not fame, not the base that now bore her name. Just the simple truth that one person could make a difference, that standing your ground mattered, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important. Nora finished her coffee, Watch the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow she would return to the range, train more soldiers, pass on more lessons, continue the work that Ironside had begun with her decades ago. But tonight she simply remembered. The weight of the rifle in her hands, the sound of bullets cracking past her head, the endless waves of enemies emerging from darkness. The moment when ammunition was gone, and only her knife and her will remained. The sunrise that she had almost not lived to see. The coin was warm in her pocket, two words worn into her soul. Stand your ground. She had. She always would. Some lessons carved themselves so deep they became part of who you were. Some soldiers never stopped standing guard even after they took off the uniform. And some nights, the long ones, you simply kept standing. 1 hour more, then another, until finally the sun came up and you were still there. That was what mattered. That was what lasted. That was the story they would tell long after the medals tarnished and the names faded. The story of one woman with white hair who refused to fall, who held the line when everyone else left, who proved that courage was not about being unafraid. It was about standing anyway.